Dr. Radin, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
Success.
Yes. All right. We have 1 minute and we're going to get started. People are coming in now. I'm going to go ahead and start things off with an introduction to you. There are many people on the platform who have familiarity with your work and who you are, others that don't. So I will go ahead and start things off with who you are. So, uh, I am honored to be here with Dr. Dean Radin. He is a scientist who has been researching a variety of different parapsychological phenomena over the decades. Dr. Radin has a bachelor's in electrical engineering, graduated magna cum laude with honors in physics from the University of Massachusetts. He also was awarded a PhD in psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He also holds an honorary doctorate of science from Swami Vivekananda University, Bangalore, India. He has been focusing his research in a variety of different ways. He is the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He leads the investigations into frontiers of consciousness and psi phenomena. He formerly held roles at AT&T, Bell Labs, GTE, Laboratories, Princeton University, University at Edinburgh, and the SRI International. That's the Stanford Research Institute. He contributed to the classical research programs, including ESP studies for US government. He has held faculty positions and collaborations with the University of Nevada, the Interval Research Corps, Sonoma State University, and Saybrook University. He served as president of the Parapsychological Association 5 times and co-editor-in-chief for the journal Explore, the Journal of Science and Healing. He is a notable author. He's authored 4 best-selling books, one being The Conscious Universe. He was awarded the Scientific and Medical Networks Book Award. Another book that he authored is The Entangled Minds. Another is Supernormal, and he won a Silver Nautilus Book Award for that. And currently, most recently, he has written a book called Real Magic. Today, we're going to be discussing his current work, which is the science of magic. And I am really happy to have you on, Dr. Radin. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Sure.
So what I'd like to do is basically cover a bit of the background in terms of your decision to go into parapsychological study. And when I say parapsychology, many people are unfamiliar with what that means. Perhaps you could provide some context for what parapsychological studies are and why you decided to take your focus into that arena.
I always find it strange that people may not know what parapsychology is, but I suppose that could happen. One of the ways that I talk to audiences where I'm not sure, they're not calibrated yet, is I say, how many people in the audience have ever had a dream that later came true, precognitive dream? So I've asked for a show of hands, maybe 30% of the audience. Then how many people have ever thought of somebody that they hadn't spoken to in a long time, and then they get an email or a phone call from them, like sometimes hours or a day later? 50% of the audience. How many people have ever had the feeling of being stared at, and then they turn around, sure enough, somebody's staring at them? So I ask a series of questions like that. There's roughly 20 or so different kinds of experiences that people report, sometimes synchronicities. And you can eventually get basically an entire audience of anyone, any kind of audience at all, even in the academic world, in the military, and general public. Almost everybody has had these kinds of experiences. The way they're interpreted is different depending on what culture, what kind of education people have had, those kinds of things. But the bottom line is that people report experiences that suggest that whatever mind and consciousness are, it's not just locked inside your head. Somehow it extends beyond the ordinary senses. And that these are connections that appear to always be here with us. They're not magically occurring. They happen mostly spontaneously for people. So the thing of interest then from a scientific perspective is, well, what is it? Is it coincidence? Sometimes, probably. Is it misremembering? Is it fabrication? How do we understand these effects? So to find out, we can use the tools of science to bring these kinds of effects into the laboratory and then test it under highly controlled conditions where you're able to exclude all of the what we can say is the mundane explanations. So we know it's not coincidence, and we know it's not some kind of sensory leakage, and it's not fraud, and it's not delusion, it's not any of that. So when you do that, this has been going on since the late 1800s, you find that there are indeed cases where you know in principle that these kinds of phenomena actually can occur where you've excluded all of the mundane explanations. And so that means that some percentage of the experiences that people talk about are probably real. And so who would not be interested in that? So you asked, how did I get interested in it? Because I had these same experiences and read about them. And of course, like anyone, I was curious about it. Like, what does that mean? Is it like most scientists, I was brought up in a very materialistic way of thinking about reality. And from a classical materialist perspective, these kinds of experiences are impossible, at least for real. They can only be a coincidence or something like that. So the fact that we can use science to actually see whether these effects are real intrigued me very early on, even as a teenager. And I got more and more interested the older I got and the more education I got, partially because I had to reconcile how could it be that through 20, 25 years of education, at least in the Western world, there's a very strong cultural bias in the Western education. But within Western education, it basically is never mentioned that science lives within a certain worldview. We live with a certain set of assumptions about the way things work. It's all based on matter and energy, that's it. And so not being told that there were other ways of thinking about the nature of reality, it never even occurred to me really, until I started looking deeply into these kinds of phenomena, and I realized that a materialistic perspective doesn't really work out very well. The more you look into it, the more you realize that it's beginning to fail as the paradigm within science. And so one of the reasons why I wrote my most recent book, Science of Magic, which I see behind you there, was to point out that we're in the midst of a paradigm change within science. And people are always saying that we're in the middle of a paradigm change. This time it is quite real. And one of the ways that you see it is you look at thought leaders in the neurosciences, in biology and in physics and a number of other areas, psychology as well. And they're all beginning to agree that something about the prevailing scientific ideas that have been around for a long time, they're very, very good for a special case. It's sort of the special case of everyday feeling of material. We're material objects, we have bodies, all this stuff. It's quite real, but that's not all that's going on. There's a lot more that's happening in Again, how could anybody not be interested in that? And the fact is that within academia, within the military, within industry, even in the Western world where there's a taboo about this stuff, huge numbers of people are interested. And I know this because they contact me and they tell me stories, and then they say, don't tell anybody, because, keep it quiet. I don't want to ruin my career. So that is a taboo. It's a very classic social agreement that some things we don't talk about. And when they find that there are other scientists who are interested in this thing, they're overjoyed. So part of the reason, another reason for writing this book is to help break that taboo, because we're not going to make fast progress in understanding what's going on unless there's lots of people, lots of well-trained scientists who can use the tools of science to actually begin to dive into this and figure out what's going on. So that was a long-winded answer, but that's my answer.
I appreciate the answer because it covers a lot of what comes to mind when a topic like this is brought up. And in this environment, specifically the platform TikTok, it's a very contentious environment. There are people who have very strong opinions based on their personal experience, their knowledge base, and a lot of what happens on this application in particular is acrimonious debate, to the extent in which there is an attempt to really discredit in whole the ideas that are being purported. One of those being that there is a reality that exists outside of the physical. And there, I think, as I was engaging early on with people who were very much set against this idea, was in part their desire to maintain a balance in terms of what is rational. There's been quite the extreme. I was actually watching some of your earlier interviews with others recently, and I was thinking about some of the questions, and I thought there's some depth that I want to touch on in regards to just that. In particular, why do you feel that there is this intense need and or desire for those who are physicalists to purport, maintain, or advocate this I'm going to call it a worldview? Why do you think that is, and do you think there's any credibility in regards to that?
Well, in science, taking a skeptical position against any claim is par for the course. That's how science works. And that is, it's a completely rational perspective. So I have no problem with any of that. What I have a problem with are people who call themselves skeptical, but they don't bother to actually learn the relevant literature. And so they may be debating or arguing from a position of ignorance. And so I've learned a long time ago it's a waste of time. That's why I don't engage in very many debates. But the reason why some people really don't like this topic is because there's a conflation that happens. They're thinking, oh, we're talking like this is Harry Potter for real? This is like entertainment? Is that what you're saying? And the answer is no. The other reason is, as I said, that most people, especially in the Western world, when they go through especially a technical training or scientific training, it is never mentioned that science is based on philosophy. In fact, a lot of scientists say, well, we don't need philosophy. Philosophers have been working on this for 3,000 years and they didn't develop the iPhone. Well, that's true. That's not one of the things that philosophers are interested in. But science is based on a set of assumptions. And some of the assumptions are almost certainly correct. Some of them are not so correct. And so if you don't know that you're working within a set of assumptions, And if somebody comes along and challenges the assumptions, which, by the way, after a while you begin to identify with them, then it feels like you're being personally attacked. Like your set of beliefs, which is the same as you, somebody's saying, yeah, some of that's not right. Well, nobody wants to hear that because you immediately have to start questioning yourself. And as I alluded to earlier, when I first started doing experiments on these kinds of things and discovering that I could do things that I had read about in the parapsychological literature experimentally at places like Bell Labs and later. Well, what are you supposed to do with that? It feels like an attack, except it was me doing attacking on myself. It was me attacking kind of where I was in graduate school, where I didn't realize yet that I was working within a limited set of philosophical assumptions. And so it took a couple of years to figure out a way of reconciling it. And the way I finally did it was, this was after a psychokinetic experiment I did at Bell Labs with myself and with my colleagues. And so that I finally justified this by saying, I guess most of what I do as a scientist, I'm using the same tools and techniques as everybody else. We're using pretty much the same statistics. Everything's the same, except the results become anomalous. So am I comfortable with anomalies? It turns out that I'm very comfortable with anomalies because I recognize that nobody actually understands what's going on at a very deep level anywhere in science. Like we don't actually know why is an electron the way it is? Why does it have charge? We don't know. Why does a proton have positive charge? We don't know. What is charge? We don't know. So when it comes to those really deep questions about the nature of physicality, we don't know a lot. What we do know is the way that things behave under certain conditions. And that's what allows us to create models with equations and so on. And that's what we're getting really good at. And that's what allows us to do technologies like this one. When it really comes down to brass tacks, when you look at the history of science, every single time that a new instrument was devised, whether it's a stethoscope or a microscope or whatever, telescope, whole new realms of reality were suddenly revealed that we had no idea that they existed before. The same is even true now. Every time we put up a space telescope, that's a little bit better. We're learning that, oh, maybe our ideas about cosmology aren't correct. As far as the oceans go, we know 3% of what's going on in the ocean. At least 97% of the planet that we're on now, we know less about our own planet than we do about things that are happening in space. So there's a lot of room left to learn. And among other things, it means that as a scientist, or actually anybody, we need to remain humble in the face of what we don't know. And so one of the ways I like to think of this is you simply make a ratio of what do we know, and you put that on the top, and what do we don't know, and you put that on the bottom. And then so you can say, okay, given that ratio of what we know versus what we don't know, how close to one do you think it is? And I would say that the answer is basically infinite, because what we don't know is a very, very large number on the bottom and a very small number on the top, where you can reverse that and say, well, close to zero. It's one or the other, somewhere between zero and infinity. Ooh, I have a hat for a sudden. So yeah, so that's part of the idea that we need to maintain humility and have a better opportunity then of not being locked into previous ideas about the way things work, because they're always changing. That's why textbooks change every 2 years.
You're talking about how it's an advantage to have a certain epistemic humility. And my understanding is that science very much idealistically approaches science with this in mind. That there are theories, and from a scientific perspective, a theory is something that is predicated on a collection of facts and consistencies in regards to testing that leads to results that are consistent and that can provide some type of uh, predictability. And this, in my understanding, was in order to make room to keep open new information, new knowledge that comes along, and incorporate that in ways that would be meaningful. My question to you is, early on in your career, when you first started to devise experiments and testing, was there anything that was immediately surprising or shocking to you, given your training as a scientist, that made you much more committed to the exploration of parapsychology?
Well, it was that first experiment that I ran at Bell Labs, getting good results with it, very good results, which I talk about in the book. I'm pretty sure that if I had not gotten a very good result with that, I probably would have not pursued this as a career, because it is much, much easier to go with the flow in any domain, especially in science. If you don't push the envelope, it's easy to succeed. But I was really intrigued at that point, and this was an experiment involving mental influence of radioactive decay rates from pitchblende, which is a variety of uranium. An experiment involved first increasing and then decreasing radiation rates. And I got odds of 20,000 to 1 after doing something like 20 experiments on myself and my colleagues. And the miracle was that my management allowed me to do that at Bell Labs. So Bell Labs at the time was one of the largest industrial labs in the world, where things like the laser and the transistor and other portions of modern internet and all of that was created. So a very technical environment, lots of opportunities, lots of people, and some free time, because oftentimes we're waiting for somebody else to finish something. So with my free time, I was doing these experiments at Bell Labs. So it was partially that, where I did that experiment, I did a few other experiments, and then I presented at one of the conferences of the Parapsychological Association. And that's where I met people who were involved in what is now known as the Stargate program, the classified psychic espionage program. I was essentially recruited at that point. I was asked, if an opportunity arose, would you be interested in joining this program? Well, at the time, there were rumors that maybe somebody in the government was doing something. And so for me, that was an offer I couldn't refuse. You mean I could work full-time on this, on the classified program involving psychics? Well, who wouldn't want to do that? So a few years later, there was an opportunity, and I spent a year on the Stargate program. It wasn't called Stargate yet. The code word was Grill Flame, but it was just one of many names over the years. And it was in that program that I realized that if it was possible to spend an entire career doing that kind of research, that's what I wanted to do. Because one of the differences was that I had known people who said that they were psychic and had done experiments myself and was reasonably convinced that there was something going on. But I had never really met somebody who was absolutely world-class, especially in remote viewing. And so it took quite a while to get all the clearances, but eventually I had the briefing, which they would give to like people in Congress and so on. And it blew my mind that people could be as good as some of these remote viewers were. And I mean, good to the level where they were useful in military missions. And then I met some of them, and I saw what they can do firsthand. And it's like another ontological shock, because you realize, I mean, if you do an experiment and you get a probability of 20,000 to 1, it's still a probability. You can sort of deal with it. It's not really pushing hard But if you see somebody do a remote viewing that looks essentially like a drawing of something which they do not have access to, and it's correct, well, then what? Especially if the drawing is something in the future or something in the past that they didn't know about, or on and on. There's just high level functioning in this domain is kind of shocking. And that's what told me then if I could figure out, or if I could help anybody figure out a little bit more about what this phenomenon is and what it says about us and our relationship to the physical world and all of that, that's what I want to do. So I've been doing that now for 45 years, which
Let's
is something
go.
to me that is probably as old as the grandfathers of most people who are watching the TikTok right now.
I think it speaks to the volume of experience that you've had. And I think that it also speaks to credibility, that it's not just a popular thing. And so you jumped on board, but obviously there's been a gradual progression in terms of your exposure and the knowledge that has been uncovered during that time.
Yep.
Let's go a little bit further into your involvement with the Stargate program. If you could define what the program was about and what it is you were mentioning that you had become aware of an incredible ability that people had in regards to remote viewing. If you could express what remote viewing means and some details in regards to that. Many people, especially here on TikTok, they're throwing out these hearsay, like, oh, Stargate program, this program, and it's a government secret thing, and others are saying there's nothing to it. You're a person who's actually been involved in the program. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the Stargate program was one of a whole bunch of different programs that were funded by various agencies, some military, some intelligence agencies. That program in particular was probably stimulated by reports during the Cold War that Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, was spending a lot of money on these kinds of phenomena, psychic phenomena, to be used for a whole variety of different things: espionage, possible influence of people at a distance, stories like that. And so it's a natural thing then that the intelligence community, part of what their job is to assess threats. So part of my job on that program was doing threat analysis. Like we hear this coming out of Soviet Union, or at the time China, Red China. They're saying they can do certain things, or they have scientists working on certain things that are psychic. And so our job was to sometimes get documents that have been spirited out of the country, and occasionally there's a person defecting from one of those countries. And so we talked to them and read the literature and tried to assess whether or not, given what we knew, was that actually a threat or not. And in some cases, we would then do experiments to see if we could replicate what others were talking about. So that was part of it. The other part was, once you get the sense that some of the phenomena are real, and remote viewing is just a euphemism for clairvoyance, perception through space and time, the euphemism was created so that it was possible to put in reports things that were about psychic phenomena without having to use that term. But we didn't say clairvoyance. We never said psychic. None of those terms were ever used because you didn't want to embarrass people who were getting the reports on the other side. So they were basically covering themselves.
What do you mean embarrass people who would be getting the reports?
There is a taboo about this topic. And so people who were involved in funding the program wanted to be sure that somebody else was not going to see that they're funding a program on psychic phenomena. They could be funding a program on remote viewing because it sounds really, really close to remote sensing, which is a very viable portion of what the intelligence community does. So this sounded kind of like that. It was easy to talk about. Sometimes they would use terms like an information anomaly or a communications anomaly. They're all ways of getting around having to talk about psychic things, but that's what they were. So it was already known because Hal Puthoff and Russ Targ, who developed the program, they had published an article in Nature, which is one of the top-rated science journals, where they talked about some of these things. It was not known at the time that there was actually a classified program going on. And the fact that they got permission to publish some of that in Nature was yet another miracle. So these things have been going on for a long time. It was also true before the Cold War. So even around World War II, there were people in the equivalent of the intelligence community who had heard things and wanted to know, is this stuff real? Is it something we need to worry about? And so on. It is continuing today. It is, as best as I know, because I don't have clearances anymore, I don't know if there were any classified programs, but I do have some reason to believe that there are government programs that are quiet, not classified, just quiet. So, and for obvious reasons, because the phenomenon is real in the hands of high talented people. It's not simply something that you can use to demonstrate that clairvoyance exists, but that it is useful. So who wouldn't want to use that? I mean, every spy satellite that goes up costs over $1 billion. So somebody's salary to be a psychic on this may be $100,000. Well, that's a lot cheaper. You can have a whole bunch of psychics working for $1 billion. No, these programs are very small, and they form a very small portion of the intelligence community and the kinds of things that they do.
Are you suggesting that governments today employ individuals who have the ability to psychically view information, sites currently, and that they just simply don't talk about it?
Yes.
I want to go and I want to investigate a little bit more about your specific research. In some of the earlier publications, you spoke about some of the experiments and the results. There are scientists now that are watching, and they're very skeptical. They would want to have some type of quantifiable context in regards to why you are adamant that the phenomena is genuine. Can you bring us to some context in that regard?
Well, when I'm talking to a scientific audience, as most scientists know, I need charts and graphs and pictures in order to do it justice. You know, it's hard to talk through a chart, but what I can say then is I'll give one example. This is an experiment that was first started many years ago, looking at whether or not it's a form of unconscious precognition. I call it presentiment because it's pre-feeling. It's not pre-cognizing or pre-knowing. It's a reflection of what your body is doing before something happens. So starting in the mid-90s, I developed a method which has since been replicated about 4 dozen times by multiple laboratories. And it's very, very simple. It's just like the essence of a psychophysiology experiment. So there have been thousands of experiments which look at how the body responds to different kinds of stimuli, everything from simple light flash to an audio tone to calm pictures and emotional pictures, and you name it, all kinds of things. And so a lot has been learned about the way that aspects of the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system respond. And I mean, as they said, there's thousands of departments at universities that this is what they do. So I knew about those experiments, and they're easy to set up. You sit somebody down in front of a monitor, a computer monitor. You wire up some form of physiological measurement, sometimes multiple measurements at the same time. What I started with was skin conductance, which is a very easy thing to measure. It's measuring the amount of sweat in your palm generally, or in your fingers. It's a reflection of the autonomic nervous system, or sometimes sympathetic nervous system. So what you do is you sit somebody down, you wire them up, and then they're looking at a blank computer screen. They press a button, and they know that 5 seconds in the future, they're going to see a randomly selected picture, which might be calm or it might be emotional. And nobody knows what is going to happen because the picture is selected immediately, like a millisecond before it actually shows up. And there's a huge range of pictures. We use something called the International Affective Picture System, the IAPS set, where each picture has already been rated according to the emotionality, the affect, and the valence, which is the direction of the emotion. So you could have calm pictures like a lake or a bunny or something like that, and very emotional pictures that either go in a positive direction, typically erotic pictures, or a negative direction, like a car explosion, things like that, or surgery. So you don't know what you're going to see. We're monitoring what's going on in your unconscious through your skin conductance. And then the picture appears after 5 seconds. It stays on the screen for 3 seconds, and then it goes away for another 30 seconds or so. And so during the last 30 seconds, the screen is blank, gives you a chance to kind of reset, and then you do this test again. So over a course of 20 or 30 minutes, you might do 20 or 30 trials, and then you're done. And so the analysis then is saying, well, let's separate the data according to whether an emotional or a calm picture appeared, and then just take the average skin conductance before, during, and after. So we know a lot about what happens when you see the picture. If you see an emotional picture and you're looking at skin conductance, it goes through the roof. It takes about 1.5 seconds, and you can see a very, very big rise. If you see a calm picture, it'll go up a little bit because you're not quite sure yet what you're looking at, and then immediately calms down again. The question is, what is happening to your body beforehand? And what I found was that before you see an emotional picture, the body is already becoming aroused. And you can see it's a very clear bump that happens, and then there's a huge bump afterwards. And so the presentiment effect is looking for skin conductance around 1 to 3 seconds before the picture is selected. You see this differential effect. You're more aroused before emotional pictures and less aroused before calm pictures under conditions where it's truly randomly selected, usually a quantum process. And so I did many experiments like that using skin conductance and heart rate and blood pressure and pupil dilation, EEG. And we find it in all of the measures. And so the important thing, though, is that I first did this around 1996. 1997, and I presented it in 1997. My colleagues said that's ridiculous because it was a very strong effect. Fortunately, one of them at the University of Amsterdam went off and immediately was able to replicate it. And so we started thinking of, well, how can we explain this, which amounts to an anticipatory effect? But it's anticipatory before something random. So how could that happen? So we've looked at lots of different possibilities that could explain this using mundane reasons. I'll just give one example. We looked at a lot of things. So one example is the gambler's fallacy. And so how this occurs is if you know you're in an experiment where you're going to get sometimes an emotional picture and sometimes a calm picture, and you know it's random, that if you get 4 or 5 calm pictures in a row, you're going to start thinking, well, it's got to come up random next. This is why it's the gambler's fallacy, because it doesn't have to. But nevertheless, internally, you start thinking, well, it's probably going to be emotional. So you think that you get like a rising anticipation that gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you get an emotional picture. And when you later look at the sequence like that, immediately after an emotional picture, you think, well, I'm not going to get another emotional picture. So everything would drop down. So you get this kind of a ramp function. If that actually occurred, that would account for the effect that we see statistically. So we've done experiments where you have one emotional picture and that's it. Or we've done other experiments where we actually see, is there actually a rising ramp function that drops? The answers are no. We don't see that in these data. So it's not the gambler's fallacy. It's not a normal anticipatory effect. For measures like heart rate, it is as much as 10 seconds before the selection of the image. Again, we're using truly random selection of these images. And we see it in the EEG, we see it in basically every physiological measure that we can do. So as I said, it's been replicated about 48 times at this point, maybe 50 times, and at least 7 different laboratories and several meta-analyses have been published in mainstream journals. So what do we do with that? Well, the reason why I thought of this as an experiment is everything devolves back into what people report as part of their experience. So here's a typical experience, and then I'll tell you one that's not so typical. The typical experience is that you drive to work the same way 1,000 times, and at one point where you're driving, there's a lot of cross streets, but you're driving towards a green light. Normally you would begin to accelerate a little bit to make sure you get through that intersection. But today you get a bad feeling. And you don't know why you get a bad feeling, but you start slowing down with a green light. Of course, confusing everybody behind you. And as you approach, you go slower and slower up to the green light. And then, boom, somebody blasts through their red light on the cross street and would have hit you broadside if you kept going the same speed. And you suddenly realize at that point, holy smoke, I saved myself by getting this bad feeling and not doing what I would normally do. Well, that's one of those things I ask in an audience of people. How many have ever had an experience like that where a bad feeling saved you in some way? And 20% of the audience will say yes. So then I wanted to simulate that kind of experience in the lab without putting people at actual danger. So about the furthest that we went is using shock as a stimulus. And that works pretty good. So you either get a shock or no shock. If you get a shock, it's not that much fun, but
Wow.
yeah, the body will
Okay.
respond beforehand, as you would expect. So here's the less typical example, because I told the same story when I was at a university and somebody said, well, I have an example for you. So this is a friend of mine who liked to go hunting. So he had a lot of guns around. So he would clean all of his guns before he went out with his buddies, one of which was a 6-shot double action revolver. So this is the double action, meaning you pull the trigger, the hammer goes back, and you keep pulling, and then the cylinder turns and it hits the next bullet. So he takes everything apart, he takes all the bullets out, and he only had 5 bullets in it because he leaves the hammer over the empty chamber, so it's not actually jostled or something. So there's 5 bullets in this 6-cylinder chamber. He takes everything out. Now he's putting the bullets back in, 1, 2, 3, 4. He picks up the 5th bullet and gets a bad feeling. It's that kind of a bad feeling. And he kind of freaks on it and says, I'm not gonna put that in there. So he set it down, and now it has 4 bullets in it and 2 empty chambers. So they go out hunting, he brings his gun, and then they come back from a day of hunting to the cabin, and they do what you should not do when there are weapons around, which is drink a lot. So 2 of the buddies get into some kind of an argument, and there's weapons laying around. One of them picks up his revolver, which hadn't been used yet, and points it point blank at the person that he's angry at and pulls the trigger. And so he's watching now with horror that the cylinder is turning, that the hammer's going back, and rather than hitting the 5th bullet, it hit the empty chamber, which would have had the bullet in it. So it went click rather than bang. So he realized at that moment his own horror and recognizing that he probably saved somebody from getting shot in the head with the bad feeling of the bullet. So he makes a joke out of it by saying that he knows everybody has at least one bullet with their name on it, and he put that bullet into a safety deposit box so he knows where it is.
Woo.
So there's, I mean, that's the kind of dramatic story that has, but it's this very similar kind of bad feeling that people get. Well, you can think of it as a sympathetic arousal. It's like a whole, like, what is happening? A moment of feeling, which in this case happened to be 2 weeks in the future, but it saved somebody. So there you go.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Very, very powerful. Okay. Couple more questions, then I'm going to allow some of the guests to come up. Shelley is one of the guests who has a couple of questions as well. But when we're discussing this new book right now, you're writing, it's titled The Science of Magic.
You want to see a copy? I have a copy.
That would be great. Yeah. What does it look
Go
like?
get it over here.
All right. Let's take a look. The Science of Magic.
Yeah.
Dean
I'm
Radin.
just seeing it backwards, but nevertheless, yeah, there it is.
Yes, yes. And when is the book actually going to be available publicly?
Now.
Is it?
It
It's
is
now?
available
Okay,
now. Yeah.
great. So anywhere books are sold, you can get this,
Anywhere
The
books
Science
are
of
sold,
Magic.
audiobooks, Kindle books, ebooks. Yeah.
What I want to go to the heart and move outward. What is the core hope and intent that you have for people who would be reading The Science of Magic? What were you hoping to contribute or accomplish with this writing?
Well, the first part of the book is I talk about this as a revolution that's underway. It's a revolution in science where the idea that consciousness is way more interesting and important than we thought is happening. So as I mentioned, mainstream thought leaders and a wide variety of disciplines are now saying materialism is really, really good. It definitely works. We're not going to throw it away, and we're not going to get rid of the textbooks. It's far too effective. However, it does not answer questions about the nature of consciousness. Like nobody knows how 3 pounds of neural tissue inside your skull gives rise to the sense of awareness, subjective awareness. That remains a major mystery. So you find major thinkers now talking about the idea of things like panpsychism. Everything is aware. There's awareness just built into the fabric of reality. You find that there's like a history within physics in particular, where many physicists up to the present day were talking already about the notion that there's something peculiar about subjectivity. Like I've spent a lot of time talking about John Wheeler, who was a Princeton scientist for many years. He talks about the participatory universe, is the way he puts it. And it's very clear, even though he would never, ever admit that he was interested in parapsychology because of the taboo, what he writes, if you just put it in a slightly different language, he would say that that is exactly what we're doing. We're looking at the participatory universe in action when we do experiments and when people describe these kinds of experiments. So that's the first part of the book. The second part is fairly long because I bring all of the empirical data up to date. I also sprinkle it with more personal experiences to kind of humanize these laboratory studies. And then the third part, I talk about what do you do when you do magic. And I'm showing like a parallel between what do we know works in the laboratory versus what magicians, real magicians, said works for them. And there's a one-to-one correspondence. We know, we kind of know from a scientific perspective that these things work, and it turns out that that's what magicians do. So for people who are interested in that. And then the last part is some experiments you can do, simple experiments to test efficacy, how well you're learning. And in addition, a couple of exercises on how do you achieve the mental state that is related to being able to do effective magic. In other words, the state of gnosis, what a yogi would call samadhi, this deep state of knowing. And so I present a very simple meditative technique that anybody can do anywhere, but it is not easy. Well, of course, if it was easy, everybody would already be doing this. So it's very easy to learn how to do, but it's not so easy to actually do it.
Okay.
Oh, and I'll end with one other thing, though.
Okay.
So this is partially from what we have learned at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is where I work. When people have a near-death experience, a mystical experience, some experiences with psychedelics, the positive ones, a meditative experience or a magical experience, like a synchronicity, or one that they intentionally do, it oftentimes will change the person's personality. So I speak to a lot of people in Silicon Valley. These are all highly technical people. A lot of them are microdosing on one or other psychedelics, and some of them are taking heroic doses while they're programming.
Right.
That transforms them from somebody who beforehand would have been the biggest skeptic in the world, thinking all of this stuff is nonsense, into having a first-person experience saying, holy smoke, that stuff is real. And that's why they contact me, and that's why I've been invited to talk to people like that. To just about 10 days ago, I gave a talk at Harvard Medical School. I was invited to give the talk. And you would think that, well, it's like the bastion of conservatism. They're fascinated with this stuff. There were 400 or 500 people in the audience, and they clearly loved it and wanted more. So the world is beginning to change. And so my last book on magic was 5 years ago already. So even in that 5 years, from then till now, accelerating change. So I felt it was useful to write about this and to maybe reach people who are either already involved in magic and just want to know there's some science behind it. And for others who are kind of curious about it because they've had these experiences, like, is there any reason, any rational reason to think that maybe some of this stuff is real? The answer is yes. And so there you go. And I see Shelley's on.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Hi, Shelley. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that Shelley's in Australia. She is joining us. She has a few questions for you, Dr. Radin. And Shelley, if you could, for those who are not familiar with who you are, perhaps you could give us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm an evidential psychic medium. I feel like sometimes with labels, it's an interesting thing. A lot of spiritualists will come up with all different names and what have you. But basically, to explain myself, I connect to spirit through evidence. And when I say evidence, it is with verified or validated information that I will receive through my different clairs, pass it on to the person that I'm, reading. And give it that way. I'm psychic, obviously. All psychics, all mediums are psychic, so past, present, future information. And I guess the other thing that I would say is I don't even know the best words for it, but energy alchemist. So that means I feel energy, not just externally, but within the body. So physically, emotionally, mentally, and the actual physical sensations that I feel, whether it be to do with energy that needs to be transmuted through from people, so healing, that type of thing, as well as like feeling people's pregnancies or certain medical things that they have going on in the body, and then past loved ones. For anybody who's interested with that, with mediumship, I will get feelings within the body to explain, like I might feel, for example, my head starts pounding. Different areas in the body symbolize different things, etc. So there's a kind of a lot there to unpack, but I'm actually so excited to be talking to both of you because having lived through all of this my life, it's very hard to explain when you don't have that, I always say academic, but the scientific / academic explanation. So I feel like the science is slowly but surely bridging the gap between, somebody like myself with what I experience, and the ability to explain it in a different format. And I'm also very interested in the research and studies that have been done, because a lot of times I don't even understand it myself. And what I mean by that is it's very easy for me to live in this way because I have for, my whole life. But to try and explain to somebody the hows or the whys, I'll often have, people asking. So for example, I've got a list of questions. Shall I just get into it?
Yeah, let's, go ahead. Let's try a few questions and see.
Okay.
See how,
so just on the back of the mediumship, I think that a lot of psychic mediums across the world have different views on whether this is something that is an ability that you're born with, or this is something that you can learn. And I know that with, and just to explain for everybody here, just in case anybody doesn't understand, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. So that means all mediums do have the psychic ability, but with the psychics, they may not necessarily have mediumship, which means the connection to spirit. And so from and my belief is that psychic ability, every single person has it, we're born with it. It's your sixth sense, it's your intuition. How well you tap into that is going to depend on your ability to access consciousness levels and your altered state of mind, etc. Whereas with mediumship, I believe that it's something that you're born with. And I guess the way to look at it is, when everybody goes to school, we all do maths and music, for example. There might be somebody who excels. We can all sing, but we're not all Taylor Swift. And that's kind of the way that I explain it. But I'm interested to understand from a scientific perspective on if you have done any research into this, or if you can explain how this works, because I see it across not only within myself, but other psychic mediums, and then just in general, because I do spiritual development with people.
Right. So as far as explaining how it works, we don't know. We have a bunch of theories. The ones that are closest to science at the present time is that we know that quantum processes happen in biological systems, probably including the brain, in which case the brain-mind system is not just in there, it's sort of spread out throughout the universe. And some people are more talented, naturally, to be able to access that kind of information. Yeah. So you mentioned it as a talent, and we know that, and this is one of the projects we're working on, is there something like a genetic basis for that talent? And so we've done a little bit of work in that area so far, and it looks like the answer is yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So one of the things that we do in a genetic experiment is we find people who are psychic in one form or another from families where there are other people who are psychic, generally down through the mother's line, not always. And we get their DNA, and then we compare it to people who don't claim any psychic stuff and their families don't either. And so this is called a case control study, where the cases are psychics and the controls are people who don't have that. And so this is done for medical problems and diseases and things like schizophrenia and so on. So it turns out that many, many traits, including talent traits, have a genetic basis. So whether that talent is expressed also depends on your environment. So you might be wildly talented, but you're living in an environment where people say, that's nonsense.
Conditioning.
Yes. In which case,
I talk about that all the time.
you could turn it off. Yeah. So some people may be very talented and they don't know it. Other people who may not be talented can learn a little bit. They can learn better than what they have, but it's not going to be the same as someone like yourself who just naturally has it.
Yeah. And I find that all the time, because I'll have people, when we have these kind of talks on my live, they'll, talk about how, oh, I had this random dream about something happening and it came true, but it doesn't mean that they can run out and tell everybody the future. Right. So, and I think that comes down the line with psychic ability as well. And I do believe that it runs in the family. I have 3 daughters and they're all gifted. My parents, actually, it's come from both sides. I think my dad is actually a lot more than my mum, but my mum's afraid of it. So, and I actually I haven't finished the book, the new one, but I have started it. And, it was actually very refreshing to listen to it, because I feel like there's been such a big stigma for such a long time. And for someone like myself, it's very hard to express or explain in a way that somebody who isn't as open-minded spiritually can understand how it works. So I was just, listening to it, I've been very excited. Very excited.
I was glad I had the opportunity to choose the reader. So I was working with a big publishing house, and they gave me 6 possible people as readers. And I like this guy's voice. It's a comforting, like a favorite uncle voice.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people would say, well, why don't I read it? And I say, you got to be kidding. You do not want to listen to me talking for 12 hours. But that guy, you could listen to. He's really good.
Yeah, that's funny. So I'm very interested I did not realize that there was, genetic and DNA testing. So I find that incredibly interesting.
That is very leading edge. So far, we're the only ones who are doing this.
Wow.
It used to be really, really expensive because we're getting the entire genome. I mean, it's easy to get the DNA, but to do the entire genome used to be expensive. That cost is coming down fast. And so at some point, we'll raise funds to do a much larger study. The interesting thing is that what we're finding is that it is almost certainly not in the genes. So the DNA is this very long sequence of billions of base pairs. Only 5% of those base pairs are what's called coding. They code for proteins, and our bodies are made up of protein. So for a long time, people were thinking 95% of the DNA doesn't do anything because it doesn't code for protein. They called it junk DNA. It turns out we now call it the intron sequence because it's a strand of DNA in the middle of genes. Right. But that intron sequence turns out to be really critical because it essentially is sensitive to the environment. It's the epigenetic switch. And so this, we think, is related then to someone like yourself, probably has an intron sequence which has turned on genes that maybe we all do have, whereas other people, those genes are not turned on. Right.
And that's interesting in itself too, because that's another, I have so many questions and things that I've written down, but I feel like I'm just going with the flow of the conversation. But the interesting thing with that is that I often have people think, they get shut down, or people that will discover later on in life, and it comes down to conditioning. And one of the questions or something that people will often mention to me is, for me, I need to be like in a raised vibration state to be able to connect into that consciousness level. But obviously I'm a human being like everybody else. I have traumas like everybody else, fears and what have you. And so the power of the mind is so incredible. And you actually do talk about a lot of that to do with in the book as well, with quantum shifting and things like that. But the mind actually runs across every single different facet of whether it's, quantum shifting or mediumship, psychic ability, sensing, feeling, energy, all of that. I've had people say to me before, if you can do this, you can pick the lotto numbers. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't actually work like that. and what we're thinking, feeling, how we're expressing ourselves, any type of fear or doubt. For myself, if I feel like I'm being tested, I instantly go into, oh, I'm not, because I put such a high expectation on myself of being, I pride myself on my accuracy. And so if that feels like it's threatened in any way, shape or form, then my mind, and I can actually block information myself from that.
That's performance anxiety. We see that in the laboratory all the time.
Yeah, so I'm interested also because I have gotten to the section in your book where you start talking about that as well, and I think that's a very interesting, from a science perspective, on the research that you've done with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we cover a pretty broad range within the book, so yeah, I hope it's helpful for people like yourself who are curious about the talent itself, but likewise for people who don't really may not have these kinds of experiences at all, and so naturally they'd be very skeptical that it actually exists.
Yes,
well, it does exist. I mean, we see it in the laboratory, but we see in the laboratory is generally not as strong as what you would get, because you're probably more in a psychotherapeutic mode where there's a lot of motivation and emotion and so on. And in the laboratory, when we do a study, we usually stay away. Like, we're not allowed to push emotion really hard and do that sort of thing because it's considered unethical. So we see generally smaller effects, but under very high control. And that's how we feel.
Yeah. The other thing that I was going to ask you from a scientific perspective, I feel like with regards to actual psychic ability, this is something that I find is incredibly interesting. For me, my personal view and understanding with giving psychic prediction is that it's based on energy, because obviously I have all the different facets of, divine timing, Akashic records, fate, people being able to manifest, quantum shift. So there's a multitude of pathways that we can take. So when giving a psychic prediction, for lack of a better word, for me, it's based on the energy and the probability that I can see where this is going to go, the trajectory of the person's energy, the energy that's surrounding. And, if you do X, Y, and Z, it's this. If you do this, this, and this, it goes down here. But I'm interested to understand from your perspective. For me, it's very hard to explain because, people say, oh, but you're always right. You're always accurate. You always get this right. I'm like, yes, but it's, we do have free will. You can just change your mind tomorrow and take a completely different path. Does it mean the prediction was wrong? No, it means that you chose not to go in that way. So I think understanding and seeing if you've done any sort of research or anything with regards to that would be interesting, because I want to understand it from a scientific perspective.
Yeah, so keep in mind that we're at baby steps here in terms of what science actually knows. But in terms of precognition, the underlying question is a precognition of a future event that must occur, is it fated, or is it probabilistic? And so there are experiments where you can actually discriminate between those two. And the studies so far, not completely consistent, but I would say it suggests that most precognitions are of the probability of an event as of right now. So if the event is far in the future, then the probability is going to be much less certain because a whole bunch of things can happen between now and then. But if it's something in the fairly short term, and you can pick up, like, there's a very high probability this is going to occur, well, by definition, that's likely to occur because it's a high probability. So that's why when people are saying, well, give me the numbers for 1 in 300 million odds of a lottery. Well, by definition, the probability is 1 in 300 million. So it's really difficult to be able to narrow down on that until maybe a millisecond before it happens, but then it's too late. So we have done experiments suggesting that we're dealing with something like probabilities, partially for the reason you said, that we have agency, we have free will. And so almost anything you can imagine, lots of other people are engaged in one way or the other. And so that is constantly churning the probabilities. And this is one of the reasons why, at least in magical practices, that when you want something to happen, you don't tell anybody else.
Absolutely, especially manifestation and quantum shifting. Do you know what's really interesting?
I'm sorry, just for in the interest of time, I just wanted to be respectful. There are others that are also going to be asking some questions. So
Absolutely.
just so you know, yeah.
No, that's
Go
fine.
ahead.
I just want to say one more thing in regards to this, because I feel like this is quite a big thing, especially with psychic predictions. Is that you mentioned whether something's fated or destiny, meant to be, and sometimes depending on what the situation is, but a lot of things are. And so you, as a psychic, we may see, feel, hear, however which way we get it, remote viewing or what have you, on the end result. And sometimes, somebody might be, oh, you've said that, I was going to, let's say hypothetically, get back with this person. I'm meant to be with this person or what have you. Depending on the way that you get there, it could take, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the pathways. And so the end result is still accurate. But it may take that little bit longer depending on the choices that we make. It's almost like fate and destiny being like the GPS of a car. This is the best way I can describe it. We have the destination, but there might be multiple different paths or routes that you can take to get there. You might hit traffic, you might have a car accident or what have you, but the end result is still there. It just may take that little bit longer, or it can come forward depending on the probabilities and energy at the time surrounding. So I feel like having more awareness around that is important for people, because it's not just a matter of pick the lotto numbers.
Well, you'll see that one of the theories about the way that magic works or manifestation works is that we, in principle, have access to information everywhere all the time, future, past, present, it's like all there. Mm-hmm. And we have agency, so we may want something to happen. And so the way that it happens is a combination of using the available information and then pushing a little bit sometimes in order to get one thing to happen versus another. When that unfolds is a matter partially of talent, because you can be really good at it, but even for almost anybody, you can manifest almost literally anything that you want. But sometimes it takes a long time to get there.
To do with the mind, it's the power of your mind and your intention, your attachment.
All the factors they talk about in the book.
Absolutely. It was amazing talking to both of you, so I appreciate that. And I'm just so excited because I feel like, and I think that a lot of psychic mediums would be the same if they don't have this, not being able to explain it. A lot of people are like, well, how? And so I think the science kind of bridges the gap, even if we're in early stages. So much that is unknown, and it's just, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Those are amazing questions. I appreciate you coming by and having the discussion. We're definitely going to need to collaborate much more.
Jump off.
Right. But we'll talk soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Can I take a 2-minute bio break?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Okay. Keep it going. I'll be back soon.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Alex and Stash. Go ahead and open this up.
Hey, how's it going? Oh, there's
Good.
Stash.
What's going on, Alex?
What's going on, Saul?
Hello, Stash. Hey. So Dr. Radin will be back in a couple of minutes. I'm glad that you guys came through. I think definitely you guys will have some questions that will be really pertinent to the conversation. What are your thoughts so far in regards to some of the things that he's been sharing?
Yeah, I like the idea of making these ideas a little more rigorous, and kind of bringing some, I guess, rigor to the subject.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me up, Saul. I think that there's some broader points that he's making, and I know that, like, in his books, a couple of which I've read, that he gets into the metaphysics, and I'd like to ask a little bit about that, and kind of what he sees, and maybe I can wait till he gets back, but along the lines of he's talking about a paradigm shift in the metaphysics, and then what he sees that the world looking like if there is this big paradigm shift. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Okay. He's back. Dr. Radin, this is Alex and Stash. They have a few questions for you.
Go for it.
By all means, go for it, guys.
You want me to
Well,
go
we
first, Alex,
begin-
or you want me to go?
We can start with Alex.
Okay, so hey, how's it going? I think Dr. Radin, you might know who I am already. Obviously, Saul, you know who I am. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know who I am, I kind of have a presence here on TikTok, mostly centered around the nature of reality. And in particular, I'm partial to the consciousness only model as an ontology. And so Stash and I here co-host a live like 3 nights a week with the thesis being centered around like consciousness is not generated by the brain. I guess I would say like I'm anti-physicalist in a sense, and for a variety of reasons. But like my focus on the live stream is helping people like think critically about what we actually believe about the metaphysical nature of reality. So I appreciate you bringing, Dr. Radin, bringing some rigor to these kind of subjects. And so the reason I came up and what I wanted to ask about is essentially I'm looking for intellectual ammunition for that mission. And what I mean by that is like, I guess the question is, if you had to pick, be it one study, one aspect of your work or work that is in the same sphere as yours, that essentially is like physicalism is false, right? Reality is not just physical. What would it be?
I think a stronger argument is that it's not just one experiment. Like the one experiment doesn't provide confidence. You want lots of experiments, especially ones that have been replicated a lot of times. And so that's like read chapter 2 in my book and you'll see a whole bunch of them like that. We're talking about experiments with random number generators and radioactive decay and macroscopic systems, cell cultures. I mean, all kinds of things show that there's some relationship between intention and attention and the behavior of the physical world. So it still might be quantum, because after all, it's a quantum observer effect, which nobody really understands, but it's there. But there may be other areas that are not necessarily psychic that also suggest that we are at least more than our brains. So from a neuroscience perspective, it's very clear that there are correlations going on. I mean, otherwise things like Neuralink wouldn't work. So I think of the amount equivalent of local and non-local mind. There's local mind going on. This is whatever's going on in there. It's a neural network. It does information processing. And much of our experience then is brain-centric. I mean, all you have to do is drink alcohol or take a psychedelic and suddenly you have a different experience. So it's brain-centric. The question is that all there is? Well, no, that's not all there is. There's other things that are going on too. So all of the parapsychological experiments are there, but there's other phenomena like terminal lucidity is a good one. I don't know. This refers to people who have had brain damage or in coma or in advanced stages of Alzheimer's, who basically their brains are not working because they're highly diseased or not working at all. And the terminal lucidity is what people in hospice sometimes will point out, the hospice workers, that a few hours before the person dies, they suddenly become lucid. They recognize who's there, they reminisce, they talk to people, they sometimes walk around where they haven't moved in a long time, and then they die. And so from a brain perspective, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because, well, if you think of the brain as the machine in the body that's causing everything to happen, including articulating, like having memory, It doesn't work anymore. It's not there. So we don't understand how that's possible. Even if there was some sort of a non-local consciousness, how was it animating the body at that point? That's a major mystery too. So this has been known for a long time in certain circles, like in hospice. Recently, some pretty good articles and books now are being written on this because it's been a major issue. Ones that are more familiar, near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and so on. But I don't think, I mean, personally, I'm an empiricist, so I rely more on laboratory things that can be replicated pretty easily, whereas terminal lucidity, you can't replicate it except you could see it happen. Same with near-death experience, very difficult to replicate, even though some people have tried. So besides the empirical work, and then I go to people like Bernardo Castro, who makes very strong arguments here as to why the only thing that we're ever aware of is our experience. So everything else becomes an inference. So I don't know how else you can put it than that. The only thing it requires is that you then see the external world as an illusion. And the question is, an illusion to who or what? Well, I think that's the physical side of ourselves. So I would say that sometimes I feel like an idealist, but mostly I feel like a dual aspect monist. Like there really is a physical world, there really is a mental world. They are emerging out of something else, which is more fundamental. And they're either ontic, two ontic states, this would be called neutral monism, or they're epistemic. They're emerging, and these are the things that we can measure. And so mind and matter have many, many different forms that they can take because they're aspects that split out of what Carl Jung called the unus mundus, the one world, the one thing that contains everything. So I mean, it's hard for a scientist to completely push away materialism because the tools that we use, the epistemology is based on materialism. So it's kind of amazing that we can still see psychic things happening in the laboratory using those tools. They're crude, but they work.
Yeah. So, I guess what I'm asking, right? Well, I guess my next question would be: is science really based on materialism, or is it based more on a kind of methodological naturalism, in the sense that you just kind of have to assume that there's no like God figure interfering in your experiments, that you can like rationally investigate the nature of reality or the nature of the behavior of reality without supernatural influence? And like the kind of second part to that question would be. I mean, it's got to be the case that pure materialism is false, right? Like, are you of that opinion or no?
A lot of it depends on what you mean by material. Our ideas about material have changed so much over the last century that people 100 years ago would have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean non-locality, entanglement? What? That's crazy. Well, Einstein thought it was crazy, and he was pretty smart. So our ideas about what physicality means have changed and will continue to change. I mean, we're working with a quantum mechanics that's still linear at this point. Well, hardly anything is linear in the world. So when you start entertaining multidimensional and relativistic and nonlinear forms of quantum mechanics or whatever's next, I think we get further and further closer to something that people would in the past have said is spiritual, for want of a better term, some non-physical something or other that involves consciousness in some way. So I think we always tend to collapse into what our provincial ideas are. And again, materialism works well enough for us to do this. If we were idealists, we still could have done this because after all, almost all of the founders of quantum mechanics were idealists.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Yeah, I think
so. It didn't stop them from being really good in understanding how physicality works.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's pretty much all I have.
Questions?
Hopefully I'll be relatively quick. Yeah, I can follow up on that a little bit just to say that I think like science is agnostic, right, to the underlying metaphysics in the sense that the method itself can be performed regardless of the metaphysics that are in place. Right. And I guess I've got your book here, Real Magic. And if I could just like quote a small thing from it. at the end, you're talking about in this section called spiritual materialism. You're talking about sort of this broader view of the implications of the metaphysics and what it means for the nature of the self and the nature of reality, which goes like sort of beyond what you're calling magic, right? Is more like you call it big C and little c consciousness, right? But you're talking about the nature of reality there. And at the end, and enlightenment. And at the end, you say, compared to the lofty goals of enlightenment, magic is more commonly associated with the acquisition of egotistical power. And then you say, but that's just a stereotype. Magic can be used for healing, counseling, enhancing survival, and reducing suffering. The range of possibilities spanning the spiritual material axis is vast. And this is right at the end of your book. And I'm sure I don't need to quote your own book to you. But I just wanted to give that context to ask this question. Let's say that everyone did sort of give up a basic reductive physicalist paradigm where everything is physical, there's nothing beyond that, and sort of the standard sort of reductive physicalism. And this was, let's say that was all like, okay, everyone accepts that that's not it, and there's more to this. What is the world that you envision? What would change both in this? You talk about the spiritual and the material, the mental and the material. What would be the changes in those realms that you think would be most important as a result of sort of losing this sort of fundamental clinging to a physicalist ontology?
Well, I would like to think that it would make us more mature as a species, but there's a lot of good evidence that would not happen. We're still pretty much primates, and we're highly aggressive, and we will throw things at each other. I don't think actually physicalism, as long as we are physical creatures, it's not going to go away, because we're constantly being reminded that we're physical. We feel separate, all of the isolation, all of that stuff. As we go forward, one of the consequences, I don't remember if I talked about it in that book or in this new book, but one of the questions that comes up is, what if we get really, really good at developing something like telepathy? What would happen to civilization? And the answer is, if we do it too quickly, it would destroy civilization, because everything in politics and in business and in law and in justice, it all depends on people not telling exactly what's going on. If everybody knew what was going on, because there are no secrets, because telepathy, you can figure out if somebody's lying in an instant, that would have to change everything. And the moment you're talking about changing like everything all at once, that's not good. It disrupts civilization to the point where it would fall apart. So we'd have to develop it very slowly, which is what's happening, very slowly, little bits here and there. And then maybe people will become used to the idea, and some aspects of interpersonal relationships are going to change. And I hope for the better. I think for the better in most cases. There is another aspect to it, though, which I hadn't actually even thought about very much until I had a discussion with somebody last week. And that is that if telepathy gets really good in the laboratory, what we're almost always interested in is receiving information, like passively receiving information. That seems okay, because you're not pushing things around, but it's actually a two-way street. So we have a lot of data from other experiments where you can, through your intention, affect somebody else's physiology, and you could also affect their behavior. And so if you got really, really good at telepathy, there's the possibility of being able to control other people's thoughts. And there are, of course, plenty of people who are paranoid about that already, maybe for a good reason. And so, these are things also that could destroy civilization as we know it. So a case can be made that from an evolutionary perspective, we have all been pushed and shaped by evolution to not be too psychic. We need some psychics around for the same reason that you always had a shaman in a tribe who could tell you, well, the food's going to be over that mountain next week. But to have too many people who are too psychic all the time actually may not be such a great thing until we're mature enough as a species to not immediately want to use it in a power sense, but to use it in a whatever spiritual sense means.
Yeah, okay, that's great. That's kind of what I was getting at, that I mostly operate in the in the sort of broader spiritual side of this, like not so much thinking about the sort of personal aspect of it, but more the transcendent. And I was curious because it seems to me that that certainly an ego with unlimited power would be a very dangerous thing indeed, right? So yeah. Anyway, I appreciate your comment on that, and I'm going to let some other people get up here. So I'll jump down. Thanks, thanks Saul, and thanks Dr. Radin. Appreciate it.
Thanks you guys. Stash, Alex, thanks for coming through.
I see.
Thanks for
Alex. You must make like 10 TikToks every day because like every time I turn on TikTok, it's Alex.
No, I have 2 pages. I don't make that many. I've actually slowed down quite a bit here recently.
You're the final
but
boss
I appreciate
of the
you.
Woo. I thought you were the final boss of the Woo, Alex. That's
I am the final boss of the Woo. Well, Dean Radin might be the final boss of the Woo, actually.
I don't have time to make too many TikToks.
Saul, is it okay if I plug the podcast real quick?
Of course.
Yeah, so Stash and I are co-hosting a new podcast. It's called Reality Gone Mental, talking all about the consciousness only model, pretty straight up philosophy and metaphysics, and just talking about like what's next once you realize that reality is mental. We're idealists, Dean, or Dr. Radin, sorry. Anyway, I don't know what you prefer to be called, but anyway, that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Take it easy.
Appreciate it. Okay. So we definitely have come to the culmination of the time allotted. So I can't let up any more guests at the moment, but Dr. Radin, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to share with us your thoughts, and I'm very much interested in reading through the book, The Science of Magic, because I think what you are providing, in addition to substantiating the experiences that people have had, is also guiding how we can utilize this in a practical way. And I think that's really, really important. So I want to thank you for sure for that. And
I thank you for hosting this because I'm familiar with the sort of web-based social media, and I like to watch funny animal things on TikTok. But I've only made one post so far because I'm never satisfied with what I see. But maybe I'll start doing it a little bit more.
It'll be great. Yes, definitely. Everyone, please follow Dr. Radin, his account. He definitely has some really informative books and information that can provide a deeper scope and understanding into this entire domain. And definitely check out the current book, which is The Science of Magic. This is going to be an excellent, excellent read and or listen. It's already available out everywhere, so please check it out. Dr. Radin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will hopefully talk very soon.
And thanks for everyone watching.
Thanks, guys. Bye.